What makes a man a man? Or a woman a woman? Is there anything more? Join us today while we discuss these questions in the search of the truth. My name is Bryce.
And my name is Tim.
And welcome to the Townsmen. We're glad you're here. So Tim, tell us what we got for today.
Today we are discussing the masculine and the feminine, and we'll just jump right into it. Of what those two are, kind of where I read them, and why I want to share them.
Yeah.
To go very shortly on where I heard about these things, most of the time was in my studying psychology.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of, it probably started with Jordan Peterson because I had no idea how any of this went.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know anything other than a whole bunch of journal articles and things that I read about. Studies on psychology and such things. I was really into criminology and things like that for a while there, but he was a good introduction to a lot of these ideas. He introduced me to people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Erich Neumann, and I think most of all Carl Jung, and that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. So in tackling the masculine and feminine, this is a huge topic that you could basically spend your entire life studying.
Yeah.
So we're really going to blow through some of this stuff for the sake of simplicity and just to get some grasp of where to work from on following episodes that will be backing off of this.
Yeah.
Along with other episodes we have.
Yeah. Just to lay some groundwork, a start point, if you will.
Yeah. Look into these on your own. There's a lot out there for them.
Oh, yeah.
And one big thing that we aren't going to be talking about in this, which is to some degree necessary to understand it well, is archetypes. I'm studying that stuff still. I have a good idea of what it is. It is just too complicated for the sake of what I want to discuss today. Masculine and feminine, basically, I don't know if this is a very good word and it might require a better one, but basically they are two forces that make up reality, make up the psyche, make up a person's mind.
Yeah.
There's masculine traits, there's feminine traits. We kind of intuitively know what they are, but we're going to dig into those a little bit.
Yeah.
And to be clear, these are different than sex. Sex is something more biological. It's a little bit more grounded. The masculine and feminine have biological roots that some of those things kind of flower up to. These are more like the petals that you would be a little bit further from the ground up. They're more abstract, if you will.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of biblical precedent for that. When you read the creation account, it said, "Let us make man in our own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female." And that was before they were given bodies.
Yep.
So to say that there's a force or maybe even a spirit, if you will, sometimes, at least in the Greek or in the older languages, force, spirit are kind of used interchangeably. And then different than sex, yeah. I mean, Adam was created first out of the dust and then Eve from that, so. Yeah. I'd say there's a little bit of biblical precedent there, but it'd be interesting to explore those. Okay, so they're not mutually exclusive.
Correct. So I am a man, but there are feminine qualities to me. And we'll say, like, my mom, for instance, is a woman.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there's not masculine things to her, too.
Right.
Even if I was someone that was 70% effeminate or feminine and the other 30% masculine, that doesn't mean I'm not a man.
Right.
So I'm separating sex and the masculine and feminine.
Okay.
Because they are separate.
Okay.
They are nested in each other. Again, something like the seed versus what comes out of the ground and what you can see and what's a little bit more, in philosophical terms, abstract, or psychological terms, abstract.
Sure. Okay.
They are correlated, and I would say in many ways they are causal, but that's not really what we're getting at.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to get in the weeds of what is a man, what is a woman, all of this stuff. Like, I'm not jumping on that boat.
Yeah, at least not yet, because there is a lot of confusion, and there is the notion of, well, these two are mutually exclusive, and they're interchangeable. But that's not the purpose of this episode. What we're trying to do is lay the groundwork when we say what is the masculine, what is feminine. Here are, if you will, some virtues or some traits that reflect this.
Yeah, so I think we'll just dig right into them.
Yeah.
We'll just jump right in with starting with masculine traits. Now, as a guy, it's very easy for me to pick up on a lot of those things in books, in television, in music, but discussing this with a couple of the guys that are in this project along with us, one of them was very adamant in saying that I need to mention, and I agree with him, that Aragorn from Lord of the Rings is a nearly perfect example of what the masculine is in literature and in film, and what it symbolizes. If we dig into like his character, it would describe a lot of what these strengths are.
Yeah. And we're saying this is the virtuous man. This is I wouldn't say the example, but a very good example.
Yeah, it's a very good example of what a virtuous, honorable man would look like.
Yeah, right. It's that glad assumption of sacrificial leadership or of living for others.
Basically subordinating himself to something greater.
Yeah.
That's a very masculine trait.
Yeah.
So we'll dig into some of these strengths and then counterbalance them out to when they can go wrong.
Yeah. So real quick, where did we get this list of traits?
They're kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different places, but I did just find a chart online, and then you and I worked through these just to find better words that were a little bit more specifically counteracting of each other. It's not to say that masculinity is this and it's not this. It's that masculinity done well is this, and it can sometimes be too much. Or not enough, depending on how you want to look at it, and it can shift to being something more like a vice.
Yeah, gotcha.
Working from that, we'll start with the strength and then name the vice to it and just kind of balance those two out. So, Bryce, what do we have for our first strength?
First strength is authoritative, and the vice would then be tyrannical.
Yep, so it's basically saying that it is a positive masculine trait to be authoritative, to take control of something when it needs taken control of. When there's a mission, there needs someone leading the mission.
Yep.
But that can go sideways when it becomes tyrannical, and then there's no room for input. There's no room for dissent or differing opinions.
Yeah.
It is my way or the highway, basically, is tyrannical.
Right. Kind of an over-domineering where there needs to be a leader. There needs to be a head. There needs to be a leader, absolutely. But where that can obviously go south is when, the subordinates, if you will, are not there because they want to be there or because they trust you. There's a degeneration of trust and confidence, and really they're just there as either blind subjects or, at worst, slaves to a degree. Okay, so what's the next one?
Next one we've got confident, and the vice to that is boastful. It's one thing to be sure of yourself, to have credible intelligence, credible things that you understand, and have reasons for all of that, and to be confident about the ground beneath you.
Yeah.
It is another to, so to speak, take that ground from beneath you and cast it over everybody else. And sort of make it seem as if you are higher than them in a sense of value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because a lot of times we hear that the vice or the opposite of confidence is cockiness. Right. But I think what this is kind of getting at is a little bit deeper level to where, I guess, how people define confidence, but how I've always seen confidence is you know what you know, and you're very good at what you know, and you're also willing to admit what you don't know and have a humility to you. Where a boastfulness is the opposite. There is no humility. There is this spirit of you know everything, and you can do everything, and you do it not for others, but you do it for yourself.
Right. And next we have Debonair, which basically means charisma or being charismatic. And the negative of that is being dominant or being the center of attention.
Yeah. Debonair, you don't hear that word too often.
Not often, no.
Yeah, but it's having a personality, if you will, because as much as, I think there's been a spirit of this, of maybe an overreaction of a stoicism to you, which I think is a good thing, but if you are purely a stoic, you're basically a statue, where there needs to be a bit of a personality to you. There should be a humility, a humor aspect, just an ability to kind of, just to have some personality and have a little bit of life to you. But then the opposite of that, and I think we may have seen this a lot in different group settings, someone who wants to be the center of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Look at me, look at me.
Yep, exactly. What do we got next?
Yeah, so the next one is self-assured, while the vice for that one is vain.
How is it different than confident?
I guess when someone is confident, usually they're expressing that confidence, or they kind of extrude that confidence, where a self-assured person, they might be very quiet, but you can trust them, and it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure that this person is assured of themselves and who they are.
Yep.
I do think that the self-assured is actually an important one because, and this is what I've personally have experienced too, when I'm not sure in my masculinity, what happens is I get so hyper-focused on it that it kind of becomes a vain act, or I kind of start acting, I kind of overreact instead of just being assured of who I am, what I am, and whatnot. There's an overreaction of that for vain.
It becomes more of like a persona feeding mechanism of, I'm just going to do what I do.
Yeah.
I'm going to be who it is I am, rather than, as the vice says in vain, that you're going to do it so you look like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of an appearance thing. Is that
I would agree.
more
Instead
akin
of just being assured of one's masculinity in this instance, you are now projecting masculinity, and you're trying to convince others that you are masculine rather than just being masculine.
Got it.
Okay. So what's the next one then?
All right. Next one is courageous as a strength, and the vice of that being brazen, or just kind of blatant disregard for your own or others' well-being. So it's one thing to understand a risk and to step forward anyways, and it's another just to close your eyes and just run.
Yep.
Just all out. Like, no, that's not quite it. That's not courageous. That's just brazen stupidity.
Yeah. And what I think, at least in the scriptures, we hear, there's one verse that's used a lot. It's actually kind of taken out of context, but be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Well, absolutely. But there's a fine line between courageous and foolish. I've always said that. And guess what? As a man, we flirt with that almost every day. Right? Is it courageous to drive 80 miles an hour down a freeway when it's the middle of a blizzard?
Yes.
Or is that foolish?
If you're an ambulance driver and you're going down the highway at 80 in a snowstorm, yeah, that's probably pretty courageous.
But if you were the one driving 80 miles an hour while listening to something and then you spin out, that's brazen.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful one. And again, to be courageous, I've always seen it as it's someone who is able to take calculated risks, and also someone who, despite their fear and desire to step away from situations and from problems, is willing to step into the situation and the problem.
Yep.
I think that is a good strength to have.
Yep.
So the next one we got is goal-oriented, and the vice is egotistical. So how do we see those two?
Yeah, parsing it out a little bit, it depends. It's what your motive for something is.
Yeah.
If you want to accomplish the mission for the sake of the mission and the good that it brings, that's being goal-oriented. That's being masculine in a proper and healthy sense. Now, egotistical might still be aiming for that goal, might still be striving for that mission, but it's for the sake of what they look like, for the sake of some sort of reward that is more akin to appearances.
Yeah, and there seems to be a trend here where the strength is a good strength if it's rooted in a sacrificial and selfless manner, where the vice seems to be more of, it's the same output, if you will.
It's like the same end, but a different means.
Yeah, the motive is more selfish in nature.
Yep.
Okay?
And the means do matter.
They do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Next we have as a strength, protective, and as a vice, isolating others.
Yeah.
We had to work through that one pretty good
bit.
because the word they offered, I forget what it was in this chart that I looked up, was really just kind of shit. So we had to sharpen it a little bit. But being protective, and I think of this as like in your household, if you're married, you have kids, whatever, It's one thing to make sure you go around the house at night, check all your doors and your windows. They're locked, you're good, you're locked down, whatever. If you have a security system, it's set. If you have a firearm or something, it's in a safe place and you're ready to use it if you need to protect your family.
Yeah.
That is a good protective instinct. That is what men should have. That is what the masculine is saying. Now, that can go way overboard when it's not a protection instinct and it's more of a keep the world out and make sure that everything within your circle stays in your circle.
Yeah.
So it's protective to, like I said, you can lock your doors, but they are still doors. They can still open. Let people out. Let your family do whatever they're going to do. They need to do it.
Yeah.
Don't hold them in there. They are not your hostages. You are not their tyrant, kind of tying back to being authoritative.
Yeah.
And that just seems like the healthy way to do it.
Oh, yeah. It's the classic picture of, the father waiting for the daughter's prom date, and he's out there with his shotgun waiting to blow the kid's head off, and it's like, there might be some warrant for that. However, it's, I've always seen it as you make sure you have they're protected, and it's more than just physical protection too, I would say.
For sure.
There is a spiritual protection, there is a psychological protection, because I think it's, although a good strength to be protective, unfortunately sometimes we set the bar pretty low, and it's just like, my doors are locked and I own a pistol that I have maybe shot once or twice. Like, okay, but are you protecting them from heresies? Are you protecting them from false ideologies? Are you protecting them from, from doing things that are going to be harmful?
Yep.
But then that overvice, like you said, where, they also need to explore and they need to learn things as well, and sometimes learn the hard way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the next one we have is physical, and then the vice is act without thinking. How I kind of take it, and I'll just focus on the physical, and the act without thinking I think kind of falls in the same as what we've already talked about before, kind of blatant disregard. Physical, one trait that I think is a good thing in men, and it should be a priority, is to be sturdy. To have kind of a density to you, if you will. Of course, this comes with more people that are active and physically fit, whatnot. There's more of that, but still a man, there should be a sturdiness to you and a physicalness to you. And I think in the scriptures is where it kind of talks about that, where, men are the stronger vessel and women are the weaker vessel. I think in that context, it's talking primarily about physical attributes. One picture that I always use is men are supposed to be that sturdy hammer that will get the job done, while women generally are the beautiful vase or painting. Can a painting be used as a hammer? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. While the man, there should be a sturdiness and a roughness to you, and there should be physical. And I guess when it's talking about act without thinking, how I would add to this as well, the safest person to spar, for instance, in combat sports and like MMA is someone who is actually a master, because they have that strength under control. They have that physicality, the ability to wield their strength and their physicality. It's the whole idea of meekness. Strength, reserved strength, refined strength. Because if you act without thinking, some of the dangerous people to fight with are guys who are just flailing their arms all around and acting crazy.
Yep.
Gotta be careful with that.
On to our next one, of the strength being discerning and the vice being clumsy. I think that one's fairly straightforward. Of being discerning means you can make a decision. You're willing to call something as it is and call something that isn't that it isn't. And being clumsy is just kind of, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Whatever decision happens, it's just going to happen.
Yeah, I don't want to say go with the flow, because the next vice and strength talks about that, but being clumsy is just, there is no discerning spirit at all. Men ought to be discerning, and if you don't have that ability, you got to work on it. Because far too often in life you can get used and abused if you don't.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even just with your ideas and stuff, like we've seen a lot of pervasive ideas work their way into the church for one thing, and in other ideologies that are probably ultimately good. You've seen a lot of what the founding fathers had to say being kind of twisted against them in some ways. And being discerning is kind of like, well, here's where the truth is and here's where the bullshit is, and cut that out. If you're clumsy, then you can just kind of take it all at once, and then it doesn't really matter because you're not critical of it. It's that you're not pursuing the right thing if you are just being clumsy and you're not being discerning.
Yeah, that's a big aspect of this project, is we want to be able to discern rightly, cut out the crap, and hold on to the truth.
Yep.
So the next one is easygoing and stubborn for the vice.
Yeah, and I think easygoing doesn't mean, like open-minded to the point that your brain falls out. It's sort of piggybacking off of authoritative or something like that. If someone else wants to do something, okay. It doesn't need to be your call all the time. If you want to go out on your boat, but your wife and your kids want to go have a picnic, guess what? You're having a picnic. You can be easygoing about it. It's not a big deal. You can do other things. But if you're stubborn and it's no, I'm going to do this because I want to do this, that just isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And now there is a time to be stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said with discerning, you have to be stubborn for the truth, for the right things. But there's moments when you have to realize that, you know what, this just isn't that big of a deal, that if it goes my direction, let it go.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see easygoing.
Yeah. I mean, Valentine's Day was yesterday, and do the classic argument of, where are we going out to eat? And how a good tactic that I have found as a man is you have a place in mind, but you provide an option. And if she says, no, I'm not interested, you pick, and then it was the wrong choice, which can happen, just be mindful of that last choice that she ultimately wanted, and then the easygoing way is, well, then next year, choose that place. Now, if it's a constant repetitive cycle where everywhere you choose is wrong, well, you have bigger issues. But that's
find
what you're
a different wife. I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
Would not recommend. Seek counseling, care. Anyways, but when a guy is sure and he is solid in his physical state and his mental state and his spiritual state and whatnot, he can go with the flow.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like that rock that it's like, different tidal waves can hit him,
Yep.
And he can kind of sway with it if he needs to or whatnot. He's fluid with those things, but yet there's a sturdiness.
Yep.
Yeah, so the next one is almost kind of like an opposite, if you will, but ambitious versus indifferent. But I do think this is a good strength, obviously, but it's an important strength. You gotta have an aim in life. And I really do feel as a man, you need to have, that's where it goes back to goal-oriented. There needs to be an aim. There needs to be something that you are ambitious for. And I think with ambition, it's more than just setting yourself goals, because you can set yourself very easy goals that don't actually equate to anything. An ambitious person is someone who it's a little bit of a bold goal, and a lot of times it's kind of an extension, or a long goal, I should say, kind of like a strategic goal. Really, I've met guys in the military, and they're ambitious in the sense of like, I'm going special forces. Now that's ambition, because to say, I'm going to join the army, that is ambitious. But saying that you're going to join one of the elite fighting forces, that it takes 2 years to get through the course to actually do it, that's ambitious. And I think Jordan Peterson rightly talks about this, is aim high. What will probably happen is you'll end up a little bit below that, and you'll find that sweet spot of where you're going to be.
Yep.
Whereas opposed to being indifferent is the person who is sitting in the basement and not doing anything ultimately productive or beneficial. And that is just a tragedy, in my opinion.
Yeah, it just doesn't care whether the future brings this or that. It's, well, I was doomed to be born here. I didn't get a choice in the matter, and I'm just going to live as long as I live. Doesn't matter. Yeah. I think that has a seed of nihilism in it, or maybe more than a seed, but that's what that is.
Yeah. Next one we have is humorous, and the vice is combative.
Look at any group of guys for any period of time, and you'll see this at play. A healthy group of guys together will be poking fun at each other, and it might seem kind of mean, and a lot of the time, looking at it more objectively, it is kind of mean. We say some pretty cruel things to each other, but it's well-meaning. We have a good sense of humor. You got to be able to figure out where your edges are and just kind of poke around and have a good time.
Yeah.
Now there's a limit to that. The reason guys do this is to find the ones that can't fit, to find those ones that are either too weak to hang or they're too combative.
Yep.
And that is the vice for this, is combative. They can't take a joke. They can't roll with the punches that life will give you. And like, I've been on a lot of construction sites and a lot of construction jobs and stuff. And the guys that can't roll with it and just get fighting and create issues in places are the kind that very often don't work as hard, come up with all sorts of excuses for why they shouldn't have to work or shouldn't have to lift this or shouldn't have to do that. And they just don't work in a cohesive unit as a team should.
Yeah.
So the humor is sort of a tool for that. And I have a very dry sense of humor, but it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a tendency, and I think all guys do, and these are our vices, they're naturally going to come about from time to time, is we'll be a little more combative.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to it as well is it is a test. And are you also able to laugh at yourself too?
Yeah, for sure.
If you're not able to laugh at yourself, I think that is a sign of insecurity.
Yep.
To where, again, kind of the previous vices that we talk about, where
yep.
you are not sure of yourself. You don't have an ambition. You don't. There are a lot of these things, and you then become combative because it's like a chihuahua that gets backed into a corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Its only vice that it has is to try to be as loud as possible because it's the smallest little thing on there.
Yep.
And likewise, you should not be scared of a chihuahua, right? You should not have to be combative to a chihuahua. You should be sure of yourself. So yeah, humor and sarcasm, more accurately, is how men communicate with one another.
Definitely.
So the next one is active for the strength, and then the vice is defiant.
Fleshing this one out a little bit can be a little weird, but how I usually look at it is kind of piggybacking off of ambitious, is if you're actively pursuing something, that is good. That is a positive masculine trait. However, if you're going to be defiant, that basically just means you don't have a goal in mind. You only care to be the opposite of what someone else, perhaps in charge of you, is saying you should do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm not going to pursue the truth. I'm just going to not do whatever they tell me, which is a very reactionary kind of mindset, and it ultimately doesn't do anything.
Yeah. No, I like that, and I think that is a good way to approach this. Because what came to my mind is being physically active.
Mm-hmm.
That as well. And I guess I'll just real briefly talk about that. I personally feel that the whole like kind of dad bod movement, the feeling of that's just an excuse to be lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that men are supposed to be out and doing things, being active, working with your hands, doing all that. And that can change for anyone, right? And some people have a higher capacity or whatnot. But I think one thing that's deconstructive and not safe, and I think we actually see this too. You know, I'm not in the fitness world or any of that stuff, but one thing that I see, kind of in the military, you see this sometimes with bodybuilders and all that stuff, is they're active, they look absolutely active, but really they're being active in a form of defiance, and it's actually more destructive in that maybe they're taking steroids or maybe they're doing something to have this persona of being active, but really they're not doing it in a safe, constructive manner. It's in a destructive manner. I've seen it far too often in the military where guys have issues because they're taking steroids or they're doing things to their body in a form of defiance. And it might be a form of hyper-masculinity to a degree where, yes, you should be active.
Mm-hmm.
But don't do this in defiance of like, well, I am then going to be the most fit person in the world and I'm going to do shortcuts and I'm going to do things that are damaging to the body in that aspect. So, yeah. So I think with those two, it's kind of up to the interpretation a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's a good one. So the last one we have on the list is spatial reasoning versus compulsive. So what do you think of that one?
We had a difficult time with this one, didn't we?
Yeah, because what I saw with spatial reasoning is that like being able to pack the back of your truck in an efficient manner.
Mm-hmm.
Then I go, but how does then compulsive fit there? And what I think it might be to a degree is there are those, best plan's only good till first contact, right? So if you're ambitious, if you have a plan, if you're authoritative, that's good. But when the plan starts breaking down, do you have the ability to kind of reason and to kind of work with what's happening? Or are you more reactionary and compulsive in your actions? One big turnoff when it comes to military leaders, for instance, is when stuff hits the fan and things start breaking down. Are you part of the solution or are you just part of the problem? Like, are you taking a tactical pause, realizing the situation, using reasoning, trying to, get a feel of what's going on? Or are you just going to then be compulsory and just kind of be reactionary in your actions?
Yep.
And I think that as a man, there needs to be that level of, all right, I need to be able to reason through this. I need to be able to see the issues at hand and be able to attack it where I think it's best, as opposed to just kind of being compulsive and just letting your emotions maybe run the show, for instance, or whatnot.
All right, then. I think then we are on to the feminine traits.
Fair warning, as to bro dudes, this might be a little, we're observers of these traits. Now, you did say that, yes, we have a masculine and feminine within us.
Yep.
I would say then for us, this might be more of like an observation on an external level, at least maybe for me.
I have a pretty good intuitive understanding of a lot of these things because I've talked about them quite a lot with women, and I also have them in me, and I'm well aware of them and actively seeking to sharpen some of them.
Yeah.
All right, then, fellow bro dude, as you say, what is our strength?
So the first strength is okay with the unknown, while a vice would be spacey or flaky.
Yeah, and just to parse that one out a slight bit, it's one thing to just, all right, I don't really know what this has in store, but I'm just going to go for it. You can tie this and the masculine together very well, of having the confidence of you know how to handle a situation. Then you can go into some of those situations that you don't know what's going on and rely on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's something else for the negative feminine where because you don't know, it's like, well, I don't know this and I don't know that. You can him and haw, and tear your whole position apart. And it's like, well, I just better not go. Because who's going to be there? Who's going to whatever? It's like, doesn't matter. Just go.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that a lot where it's, well, what should I wear? Is this person wearing this? Is this person going to be here? Is this person going to wear this? Is this person going to do that? Well, I haven't talked to this person. It's like, just be okay with a lot of these unknown variables. And to kind of get on that as well, you have for the strength humble, while a vice then is insecure.
I think in there it's one thing to allow room for others. It's a whole other thing for there only to be room for others. That seems to be the difference between humble and insecure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What's next then?
Thoughtful and gossiping. So this actually ties in with the virtue I'm working on now, with relating back to our previous episode on the 13 virtues of Benjamin Franklin. And I already have a few checks for the week. Probably make another one for today, of being careful in how you speak and being thoughtful in them. Now, being thoughtful is not necessarily the same thing as being careful.
Mm-hmm.
You're not full of care, you are full of thought. So are you thinking about what you're saying, rather than tending to be a little bit more gossiping and just talk about stuff that doesn't matter, or as the term goes, bullshit.
Yep. Is there constructive or destructive thinking and speech in that aspect? Yeah.
Yep.
So what's next then?
Working from there, compassionate versus hysterical. The feelings for someone else. And that doesn't necessarily mean like romantic feelings, but it's like if you have a child and they scrape their knee, it's one thing to approach the kid, pick him or her off her feet, and check the wound, make sure it's okay, comfort the kid, understand that this is a big deal for a young child.
Yeah.
And do not go absolutely hysterical. Go sprinting up to the kid, make a huge deal that they scraped their knee, and then promise to never let them go outside of their plastic bubble ever again.
Yep.
That is hysterical.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. It's kind of the helicopter parenting where it's helping the kid understand you're going to get bumps and bruises. Things are going to happen. And it could be emotional as well. Breakups, you know.
Yep, for sure.
Oh, my kindergartner, you know, got broken up with and whatnot. It's like, they're kindergarten. You don't need to get hysterical about this stupidity, you know. You need to be compassionate.
Yep.
But just understand, the world's going to continue revolving around its axis.
They'll probably need a nap and maybe a couple days of, you know, an extra scoop of ice cream that week or something. But like,
exactly.
The world keeps spinning.
Yep. Okay.
Onward from there, we have social and passive, which is an interesting comparison because they might not seem related, but I think we'll get into that just a smidge.
Yeah.
Of social being similar to how we were discussing men being debonair. You can be talkative, you can be charismatic, you can be interacting with people at some sort of gathering, whether it's church or a party or whatever. That's a good thing. Now just being passive is basically being a wallflower.
Yeah.
Like all of these people are walking by, and I understand what it's like to be introverted, but you still have to try to push yourself out there a little bit and strike up a conversation with somebody or something.
Yeah. And real briefly, this is for me from an observatory standpoint. What I have seen with feminine is when it comes to being social, there's this kind of built into the fabric of just being around others and making a connection with others. That's as the social, whereas opposed to being passive, it's not even attempting to make a connection. You know, where for men, we're okay with not having to make a connection with someone. We're more about the mission or the action at hand, being that action oriented. But I think for the feminine, there is a strong focus on, well, I need to make a connection first. I want to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
The mission, and that'll take care of itself. But first I want to make a connection. And I've even met very introverted women who are still social.
Mm-hmm.
They're social with their group as opposed to generally more extroverted. They're just social with everyone.
Yep.
And I think that is a good trait.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one we have is sympathetic versus the vice of think without acting.
Yeah, so feel a situation out, understand someone's feelings, and then doing that to the point of still being able to act off of it and not just being stuck in indecision mode and continue thinking, continue feeling, continue just dwelling within yourself without acting on some of those impulses.
Yeah, because how I've always defined sympathy is, say somebody's drowning. A sympathetic person is going to save that person from drowning.
Yep.
Well, as opposed to the vice is think without acting, is this whole indecisive, just constantly thinking about it. It's like, no, you need to save the person.
It's like, well, I don't know what to do once I get them to land. It's like, well, being on land is a hell of a lot better than drowning in water. So just get them to there first, then approach it from there.
There seems to be a really good switch of like, oh, that person needs help.
Yeah, mama bear.
Right. Yeah, that whole mama bear. I think that's a good strength to have.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're only pointing out issues and not actually acting upon it or collaborating to solve the issue, then that's where it can be a vice. So the next one is graceful for strength, and then you have the vice is fragile.
Kind of depends on where you put the glass.
Yeah.
Are you wearing glass slippers or do you have glass bones?
Yep.
That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and I kind of equate this to women's sports. What I'll say is there is an aspect of the sport where they're graceful.
Mm-hmm.
But where it becomes a vice is when there is so much of a fragility to it, to where it's not graceful anymore. It's just like, kind of seem like an accident waiting to happen, or there's a, this, where I'll give you gymnastics as a good example. How men do gymnastics is they are showing their strength and their feet on what they can do. But for women, it's how graceful are they in the act. And then the vice for that being fragile is when I'm not able to be graceful at all. you know?
Next we have attentive, and as its vice, nosy. So it's good to pay attention. It's not good to pay too much attention.
Yeah.
To some degree, it's not your business. Keep out.
Yep. How I see it is, why are you listening? Because you're going to be listening. Why are you listening? Is it to gather good information, to bolster up what's good, to encourage what's good? Or are you simply trying to get in everybody's business? And again, the previous vices, to be a gossip or to be a drama queen, to be hysterical. Like, what is the reason why you're listening and why you're being so attentive?
Yeah, is it to serve others or serve yourself?
Yep.
Ultimately, that's what all of these things do.
Yep.
All right. Caring or obsessive?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about being kind of like the whole mama bear thing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you being sympathetic? Are you being compassionate? Or are you obsessing over the like the man, when he's overprotective,
Mm-hmm.
for I think the woman, it could be over-caring.
Mm-hmm.
This is the example that I see. It's like to be caring to a dog, right? You make sure the dog is fed. You make sure the dog has fun. You make sure the dog is, trained and whatnot. An over-caring person, why do you get a dog a coat? They are a wild animal, and most dogs have a double coat. But the over-caring person is, make sure the dog has slippers.
Yeah.
And so it's the counteraction of be caring, make sure somebody's fed, make sure somebody's well taken care of.
Yep.
But the obsessive part is to where the person, they're no longer being treated like a person. They're being treated like a fragile object.
Yep.
They can't do anything.
Well, and how I see it too is I have dated caring women, and I have also dated obsessive women. It is a whole different ball game. One wants to know what you're up to because they care about your day. One wants to know what you're up to because they're not part of it.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That's a whole other game there,
yeah,
man. That's
a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
So next one is empathetic versus frightened. Again, sympathetic and empathetic, they're not synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
And another topic for another time. But how I see empathetic is it's someone who, if somebody is drowning or having a tough time, they kind of jump in there with you and kind of empathize with the situation. While the vice then is to be frightened. And I think what that is sometimes it's good to be next to someone. I think of Job, right? His friends didn't go through these same things that he went through, but they were somewhat empathetic in that they sat with him. They were consoling with him, as opposed to being frightened of the situation and not being bold enough to help or to be empathetic. Because sometimes you just run away from the situation and not even be empathetic or sympathetic, for that matter, and just be frightened of the whole thing and break away from the situation.
Yep.
So then the last one that we have for the feminine traits, you have verbally skilled as the strength and then complaining as the vice.
Yep. And I've experienced this too, and I've done both of them. It's one thing to articulate out what a problem is as clearly as one is able to. It is another thing just to be complaining about it. Like sometimes I need to process what exactly it is that's going on or something that bothers me about a certain person or situation or something in my life. And that can sometimes take a turn to where it just becomes about like, that son of a bitch Bryce did this again and it just pissed me off and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And on it goes and on it goes, and then it becomes gossip, basically.
Yeah.
Articulating out something that would bother me about a friend or a family member or a situation is an important thing to do.
Yeah.
But when that just becomes sour and you're just this pent-up ball of bitchiness that you just need to bitch about it, and I've bitched about things, I get it, I've been bitchy, that's not good.
No. Yeah, and my immediate response, and maybe this isn't a good one, but talking about the feminine, verbally skilled versus complaining, I kind of think of how the feminine explains emotions. There is a skillful way of explaining the emotion and articulating the emotion and how you're feeling, while there is a way then which is more just kind of complaining, right? It's like, Jim, forgot to pick his socks off the ground again, right? The verbally skilled person will have a tactful way of approaching and reminding maybe Jim of picking up, or better yet, is being empathetic and sympathetic, like, oh yeah, it's because he got home at 2 o'clock because the, manager on the late shift was sick and he had to cover down, right? There is a skillful way, as opposed to just complaining all the time. Well, why did you not put the recycling down again? As opposed to, hey, I noticed you haven't put down the recycling down again. What's up? Skillful versus just complaining.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much wraps up really the very, very, very introductory lesson, if you will, of the masculine and feminine. Now, we tied these together with the male and female because it's really hard not to on this level.
Yeah.
without getting too abstract and too esoteric.
Yeah.
Where you have to read a dozen very long books to really start to understand a lot of these things on some of those more abstract levels. But I think this is a good place to leave it. These things are in people, and like when I was explaining the feminine, I was like, yep, I do that, I do that, I do that, whether I verbalized it or not.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and how I saw it too is like, well, that's just being a good person too sometimes. You know?
A good person, I think, ultimately does all of these things. Like the strengths on all of them are good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting to see how these two interact. And again, this was just a launching point to start the discussion of the masculine and the feminine, so we can branch off to different things. And we hope that this starts a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We need to continue the conversation rather than just being reactionary to everything.
Yep, absolutely. Well, all right.
So, thanks for listening. If you found it helpful in your pursuit of the truth, we encourage you to share this with someone. That's really the goal of this, is to share it with a friend, share it with someone, to start the conversation.
And that is the operative piece, is to start a conversation. We need to be talking about these things again. And it doesn't mean copy what we think into your brains and send it to the next person. Have a conversation, and if you want to disagree with us, there's a Discord for it.
Yep.
Because I will be wrong. I've listened to previous episodes. It's like, well, I probably could have done that better.
Yep, same.
So it just takes people talking about these things, getting into these things, leaving comments on things. We need to be able to talk about these things. Because if we can't talk about them, we just become balkanized in our own little camp, and that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
Things do not work. This system that we have of governance does not work unless we're communicating.
Yeah.
So we need to communicate.
Yeah. We're the townsmen. It's not just townsman. We're the townsmen. We want multiple people from all different backgrounds. If you have something good to say, or if you have something not good to say, you don't like what we said, jump on in.
Bring it on.
We're here to listen. This is Bryce.
And this was Tim.
We're glad you stopped by. We'll see you next time.